So they've literally put people into CAT scanners after they've had chocolate and found that it improves the blood flow to the brain, to the skin, everywhere.
Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. First up is the Herbs with Rosalee Student Spotlight. Each week we take a moment to celebrate one of our amazing students and their inspiring contributions to our herbal community. This week we're shining the spotlight on Lena Smith from North Carolina. Lena joined our Herbal Energetics course last fall and has been deeply engaged and a dedicated student on the certificate path ever since. Lena's love for herbs shines through in every community post and module review. This is clearly her passion. She brings such a rich, imaginative quality to her reflections, especially when describing her tasting notes for each module. Her words make it easy to imagine being right there beside her, sipping alongside, and experiencing the plants through her senses. One line from Lena's review truly captured the heart of her journey. She wrote, "Learning about the plants this way is like entering a new world full of magic and surprises, where you need to acquire a new language, the language of plants." This was a beautiful reminder of the wonder and discovery that this path offers. When invited to dig deeper into her plant ally for the pungent taste module, Lena went all in, doing the research, asking thoughtful questions, and exploring with a spirit of curiosity and devotion. She's the kind of student who inspires everyone around her with her dedication and joy. To honor her contributions, Mountain Rose Herbs is sending Lena a $50 gift certificate to stock up on their incredible selection of sustainably sourced herbal supplies. Mountain Rose Herbs is my go-to for high-quality organic spices, herbal remedies, and even hard-to-find botanicals. They ship all over the U.S. and have a massive selection of products to fuel your herbal adventures. So thank you to Mountain Rose Herbs for supporting our amazing students. And if you'd like to explore Mountain Rose Herbs' offering and support this show, you can find the special link in the show notes. Hey friends, it's Rosalee. If you've been nourished by this podcast, if it's helped you feel more connected to the plants or more grounded in your own herbal path, then I'd love to invite you to join the Herbs with Rosalee podcast circle. This special membership helps make the podcast possible. It supports everything we do behind the scenes, and it gives you a chance to go even deeper with the content that you love. Inside the circle, you'll get exclusive herbal resources, live classes each season with some of my favorite herbal teachers, and a private space to connect with fellow plant lovers. It's where the heart of our herbal community continues to grow. To learn more and join us, visit herbalpodcastcircle.com. Your support means the world, and it helps this podcast continue to bloom. I might have had too much fun on this interview. It was such a delight to dive deep into the world of cacao with our guest, Marcos. He shared benefits of cacao that I'd never heard of before, along with some fascinating insights on how to work with this beloved plant. I even took the opportunity to tease my bestie about her affection for what I lovingly call inferior chocolate. But I do have a word of advice. Do not make the same mistake I did. Be sure to have some of your favorite cacao on hand while you listen in, because trust me, if you don't want some now, you definitely will soon. For those of you who don't already know him, Marcos Patchett has practiced as a medical herbalist since 2005, initially specializing in complementary care for people living with HIV. He practiced from Neal's Yard Remedies Therapy Room in London from 2007 to 2016. He was a clinical supervisor at Middlesex University's Western Herbal Medicine, Westminster University, and Hartwood Online. His first book, The Secret Life of Chocolate, was released in 2020, and the paperback edit, Pharmacology, came out last year. Marcos also teaches medieval astrology. He launched Planetarium, a school of medical astrology for herbalists, therapists, and medical practitioners in 2024. Marcos, I'm thrilled to have you here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm equally excited to be here. So thank you.
Oh, lovely. Well, so I have to say, I've heard you on another podcast. I heard you on the Plant Cunning podcast, another fabulous herbal podcast. And I got to hear your origin story on there. And I remember listening to the origin story thinking like, this is memorable. Like, this is unlike any origin story I've heard.
I have no filter sometimes, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad
well,
thing.
I'm here for it. I'm excited to hear it again, hear the nuance, etc. So yeah, what brought you on the plant path?
Okay. Thank you, Rosalee. Well, I think when I was 18, 19, I was basically partying too much. I mean, I moved down to London to do an art degree. I was going out a bit too much and partaking of various substances, some of which were not so good for me. And after a year or so of this, just going out and partying, sort of realized that I was short-circuiting my nervous system in a pretty extreme way. So I started looking for ways of staying up all night that didn't involve taking things which were going to cause potential lasting damage. So I went into a Chinese medicine herbalist.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? I'm just curious because I need to know the details now.
Sure.
So you're like, I still want to party all night. Like that.
Yeah.
You're like, I want to hang out with my friends. I want to go to the clubs.
Yes.
I want to have a good time.
Yes.
You're like, but maybe like the drugs aren't so great. So like, how can I do it like more naturally? Okay.
Yeah. Totally. That was the whole thing. So, and where I live in North London, there are, as in many cities now, I mean, we're going back, this is like the late 90s. So this is like 96, 97, I think. Maybe 98, actually, because I'd been partying for a year already. Anyway, whatever. There were lots of Chinese herbalists around. So I went into one of these Chinese herbalists and said, have you got anything that can keep me up all night, basically? And they were just like, okay, so who is this mad boy coming in here asking for stuff? But they gave me some ginseng pills, I think just in capsules, so really basic, and just said they said take a couple now. I think I went in on the Friday and I said I'm going out on Saturday night, and they said take a couple now and a couple this evening and a couple tomorrow morning and a couple before you go out, and then the morning after when you get back. And I was like, okay. So because I was like 19 and stupid, I just thought, I ignored all their advice and I took a big handful just before I went out, and I didn't really notice anything. I was like, oh, that's a bit rubbish. But then the day after, I felt okay. I was like, this is weird. Normally I'd feel like absolute garbage the day after, you go out all night and smoking and drinking and whatever else. I felt all right. And I was like, oh, this has done something. This is really interesting. So then, because this was dark ages, like early ages of the internet and whatever, and there wasn't much online. There were a few bits. I actually wrote away to the Encyclopedia Britannica for like info sheets. I mean, this is showing how old I am now, but like they sent me these info sheets, and it was fascinating because one of the sheets sort of said, oh, Panax ginseng, there's different species, Panax quinquefolius, Panax ginseng. Panax ginseng is the Korean and Chinese species. And it does all these different things in experiments. It restores the body to homeostasis. It reduces stress. It improves stress responses, yada, yada, yada. And then at the end of it said, but many scientists consider this to be a placebo. And I was like, well, it can't be. It's got to be one or the other, right? Because they just mentioned all this research, mainly from Russia, from Soviet Russia. And then they said, but a lot of scientists think it's made up. So I was like, right, that was plenty for me to get totally invested. And I went out and bought ginseng in every form I could find, like roots, extracts, whatever. I started decocting it. I tried smoking it. I did just like ingested it in every form I could. And I absolutely satisfied myself that this did something. And it really helped improve energy and stress response. So then I got a little book out the library on herbs. And at the time, because my head was still in a fairly naughty, party-oriented place, I was looking for stimulants or things that would, help me party. But I started reading about because it was one of those old sort of early 20th century herbals where they use that quite, I love the language actually, but it's like that 19th century eclectic language where they talk about diaphoretics and stimulants and rubifacients and all that lovely herbal language. But they talked about stimulants, and they were talking about things like cayenne being a stimulant and valerian being a stimulant, even though it was a sedative. So it was an odd use of the word. So long story long, I basically just got drawn into the herbal world through that avenue, because I started experimenting with herbs for other things then, and then realized that, oh my God, this is this whole world. Because at school I found chemistry and pharmacology really boring. I was an art student. I'd been a really well-performing student at school, but then, like as happens with many good kids, like they move away from home, the lid comes off and they party too much, and I was at art school just, you know, being mad. And then I sort of realized that, oh, I find this chemistry really interesting. Suddenly it turned me on to chemistry as well. So that was how I got into it. And then I started working in a health food shop, just because I needed an extra job, and I'd done jobs in the supermarket and in bars and stuff. So I thought I might as well just work in a health food shop. And I just got more and more into it. And it got to the point where I was I think it was Holland & Barrett. I worked there for 3 years, and I ended up telling people coming in to go and see a herbalist, which didn't get me many points from the store manager, but I was like, oh, you're not going to get exactly what you need here. You need to go and see a herbalist and they'll prescribe stuff to you. So after a few years of that, I was so into it, and I was asking my friends, well, what do I do with my life? I knew I didn't want to become a full-time artist because it seemed like there wasn't really a career path, and I didn't fancy just continuously self-promoting my whole life. And I sort of felt like art was fun and wonderful, but I wasn't really being of service in any meaningful way. And then so all my friends just said, you have to study herbal medicine because you never shut up about it. So I basically got punted into that. And then in retrospect, when I was growing up, and I think I might have said this on the Plant Cunning podcast as well, but this was only something I put together later. It's kind of like one of my grandfathers was an artist, but he died when I was very young. And my other granddad was actually a chemist working at Glaxo, but in his spare time, he was a gardener, and he did a lot with herbs. And when we were little, he used to make herbal wines like cowslip wine and dandelion wine and bramble wine and all this stuff. And he used to make me and my sister help him. And as kids, I used to find it, you know, it was obviously really boring. It's just like, you're doing this stuff. But I think he had a herb garden, and he had books like The Secret Life of Plants and stuff like that. So all of that was around. So I think I was probably, you know, absorbing a bit by osmosis as well. So there was probably a little bit of background, unconscious substrate there that I didn't become aware of until later on.
Yeah, I often feel like the plants, like I hear in my own story and other people's stories, like, oh, they called to us this way, and then this way and this way and this way. And it's like, it's like the one way, right? It takes like time, you know, like it's kind of like we have to keep listening and then before we get sucked in.
Yeah, I didn't get one of those beautiful stories where it's like, oh, I was called from an early age. I mean, but I did. There was an interesting thing. I know. I don't know if I've said this before, but there was my cousin Laura said to me a few years back, oh yeah, when you were a kid, you were always playing like potions and like using plants out of the garden, and like I'd forgotten that. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, you know. So, but yeah, it is interesting. I always think herbalists can be top down or bottom up. So bottom up meaning you start with your hands in the soil, and then the book stuff comes later. You know, they're drawn to the plants and the growing of the plants, and then the book stuff comes later. Or I was a top down. So as in, like, I came at it from the sort of, ideas, intellectual, this can do that, that can do that. And then gradually, as I got more into it, I'm still not a top-notch gardener, but I'm getting better. Not as many things die. I mean, my garden is still a bit Darwinian. Do you know what I mean? But it's like, if I plant it and it lives, that's great. But you know, I'm getting there.
I just like see testimonials about Marcos's garden. Like, not as many things die. It's still a bit Darwinian.
It is a bit like, I mean, I'm like, weeds love me, and that's great because we obviously work with weeds a lot. So yeah, I have a garden that's filled with I mean, it's only a small town garden, but it's filled with things like teasels and teasels and brambles and, you know, weedy things. But that's brilliant because they're all heavy things. And then a few other things that randomly seem to like me, like rosemary and a pond filled with calamus and lots of betony. Yeah.
Well, something I hear in your story, Marcos, is you say you're top down with the books, but like what I hear is like you went to the Chinese medicine shop, you got the ginseng, and then you like went all in on ginseng and like got all the different kinds. You tried it in all the different ways. So it's very like hands-on. Like it's not just intellectual. Like you.
No, that's true. That's true. I like to do stuff. I like to, you know, so but I top down in the sense that it started with like, you know, it starts with the idea and I get carried away with the idea and then I have to do something with it. So yeah, I think as a herbalist, you have to end up, because it's a physical art, right? You're working with ingredients, you're create, you know, so yeah, the medicine is literally living. So yeah, you have to end up working with the stuff at some point. Yeah.
And I love that you just went like so far in on ginseng. You were like, okay, I took a handful of capsules, but something now I must know everything about ginseng and go for it.
In retrospect, it was probably wildly irresponsible, but you know, it was also just like it was a good way in, you know. So so yeah, as I say, I do overdo things sometimes. I am somewhat obsessive, and that can be a really good thing or a not so good thing. Do you know what I mean? Depending where that is channeled.
Thank you for saying the word obsessive, because I didn't want to call you obsessive. I am also very obsessive. So just speaking for myself, I'm a very obsessive personality. People who know me know that well. So I recognize that in a fellow obsessive. Thanks for broaching that word.
Well, that's very kind of you.
But I have heard it also called enthusiastic driven. And so that's what I say now.
Right.
I'm enthusiastic driven. So
that's a much kinder reframing of it and more potentially useful. And I do think it can be a useful thing. Like I say, if it's channeled properly, I think that can be amazingly powerful. If you're just like, I mean, that's the thing with kids, isn't it? Like if a child has an enthusiasm to some extent, if you can, you know, get them to follow their enthusiasm, you can lead them in the direction of something that's productive and good for them. So yeah, I think obsession can be, I like that. What was that reframing you gave? That nice phrase?
Enthusiastic driven.
Enthusiastic driven. All right, I'm going to remember that. Yeah. I might write it down.
For me, it's herbs and Tori Amos. So that's, I don't know if that's like the best thing, but that's how it's come out. So
she's pretty cool. Yeah, I remember Tori Amos, Little Earthquakes and all that.
Yeah, she's still around. So, you know, not past tense, Marcos. Sorry. Which is all to say that you have also, I think, have been enthusiastically driven towards the plant you chose today, which is cacao. And,
yes.
And I'm excited to talk about that with you. I have yet to see your books. I know they're being sent to me, but I know that they are. One has been described like a tome. Is that how you say that?
Yeah,
it's a huge freaking book.
It's a bit. It's a shame that you don't. Yeah, have it yet. It's this guy. So
oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
So for people who are listening, watching, this is a textbook on cacao. This is huge.
Yes.
All right. Well, where do we begin with cacao then?
Okay. I mean, I guess I could maybe start with why I wrote the book in the first place, which was, I mean, like you said, I was always, like many of us, I have always appreciated chocolate. I've always been interested in it. And I also, when I was in that sort of like phase of coming out of my party era, let's say, I found myself almost quite not addicted, but drawn to dark chocolate. Like it was almost like my post clubbing recuperation food. I talk about it in the introduction to the book, was like a banana with melted dark chocolate on it. And I almost was kind of obsessive about that. And I've always had an appreciation for subtle plants, but nowadays I don't really regard cacao as subtle. I think it's pretty unsubtle in some ways, but it's subtle in the when you compare it to like street drugs or something. It's unsubtle, but it's so pervasive. It's everywhere in the culture. But I was always a bit of a chocoholic, and I sort of started to realize that it had an effect on sort of my self-perception. When I consumed it, I felt better in my own skin and more comfortable. And this is sort of noticeable. I began to notice it a lot more. So I was like, this is really interesting. So when I started learning herbal medicine, when I started doing my degree in 2001, I'd already sort of decided, I think I want to explore this a bit more. And when I graduated in 2005, I was like, right, I'm going to write a book on it. And the book was partly intended to be a bit of a Trojan horse to get some other ideas about natural medicine across to people. Just the idea that, so taking one plant, cacao, as an example of how, you know, when you start getting under the surface of it, it's complex. So I'd read it. Okay, so the other thing that spurred me was there was a book by Jonathan Ott, who's an ethnobotanist, and he'd written a book called Chocolate Addict, which I'd read, which I love. It's behind me. It's like a little paperback, and it's a brilliant book. But Mr. Ott is a very conventional ethnobotanical type, where he's thinking about things in terms of what I call the Victorian drug model, where every plant is reducible to its active ingredient. You know, it's like, so I say sort of sarcastically in the book, like apples are vitamin C with packaging. You know, it's that sort of idea, like the Victorian idea of like, okay, well, it's this bit that makes it go, and then the rest is sort of miscellaneous, you know, stuff. So he sort of said that, oh, cacao's main psychoactive ingredient is theobromine, and that is what makes your heart beat faster, and that's why it has a reputation as a food of love and all of this stuff. And I thought, well, I know subjectively that doesn't seem to be true, because I've ingested caffeine in all of its other forms, you know, like green tea, guarana, mate, coffee, whatever, and each of them seem to be qualitatively different, and that seems to, you know, and I had various doses of these different things, so I didn't think that seemed accurate. So I had a personal bee in my bonnet about it, so that sort of drove me to do it. So I had a few different incentives, and the other reason, of course, was I thought, well, chocolate's going to be popular, so hopefully it'll sell. So those are my three main reasons. Yeah. Oh, that was the idea. So yeah, but I mean, I've always found it a fascinating substance, because it is so culturally powerful, as in, like, it, you know, it's when it was in Mesoamerica before the colonization of Central America, it was hugely important to the indigenous cultures there, both sort of the various Mayan cultures and the Mexica and all the other indigenous cultures. It was very, very central in Central America. And then when it got exported into the old world, into Europe and whatever, it became initially very popular among the aristocracy, and then it spread around everyone. And of course now it's sort of the Valentine's Day thing. It's got all these associations with luxury and decadence, but it's always had this slightly dark side to its history, with associations with slavery and social iniquity, and those go back even to its pre-colonial roots, you know, like particularly in the Mexica, in the Aztec sort of hierarchy. And that was, I don't think it was also always quite so true in many of the Maya regions in Central America, because cacao grows in these sort of rainforesty regions where it's quite high humidity. So where a lot of the Maya were in the Yucatan Peninsula, and that they could grow cacao. So the common person, the everyday commoner, as well as the rich, could grow it and harvest it and consume it. But in the Aztec kingdom, the area where the Mexica were, they had to have cacao imported, because it's like a dry, arid central zone, and cacao didn't grow there, so they had to have it imported thousands of kilometers on foot, because they didn't have draft animals. So only the rich were allowed to consume it. It was used as money, famously, by the Mexica, and so it had this. It was actually prohibited for use by the poor and by many sections of society, and there was this whole association with social iniquity and slavery. So cacao's always had this interesting identity socially as a substance of sort of luxury and pleasure and riches, and that is beneficial, and it was seen as beneficial to health as well, because it is, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But it was also had a slightly dark side to it. So that for me always fascinates me, that sort of the cultural identity of different plants, because you can take it and you can analyze that in a very rationalist way, as in, like, okay, this is why this plant plays this role. Like with coffee being the avatar of capitalism, you can see why it fits into that box. But then you could also take it and look at it through quite a metaphysical thing and say, what is the personality of this plant, that this plant takes on this identity when it interacts with humans? So yeah,
I find that equally fascinating, because we could say there are many lovely plants out there, wood betony, calamus, what have you, but we don't have the same relationship with humans as those. I mean, think of all the many ways that we grow, harvest, package, and spread cacao throughout the world. I mean, it's, there's just those few the plants that we really do that with. And so that is a very fascinating thing to think about.
It is. I have several theories that I put forward in the book about that. And I tried to approach it from a sort of looking a little bit at the history, just the potted history in the first bit, and then loads on the pharmacology and the medicinal uses, because I think that's, obviously as a herbalist, to geek out on that, and then a bit about the mythology as well, and the sort of the metaphysics, just for sort of framing it from those looking at it from those three different vantage points. But I think one of the reasons might be, and this goes to the earlier thing I was saying about Jonathan Ott saying, oh, it's just theobromine. It's like that Victorian chemistry thing of it's just this with packaging. Obviously, theobromine is the main alkaloid in cacao. It does contain caffeine, and it does contain a bit of theophylline, same as tea, same as coffee, but they're all just in different ratios. And cacao, it's like I would say, it's Diana Ross and the Supremes. Like, caffeine's the Diana Ross, and then you've got theobromine and theophylline. But actually, in cacao, theobromine takes the sort of central role, and there's much less caffeine. And theobromine's an interesting compound in and of itself, because it's a stimulant to the heart and the kidneys. So it makes you pee, and it makes the heart beat harder and faster. But it's also been discovered more recently to have the property of increasing the levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. In other words, helping neuronal connections, which is fascinating. And it weirdly also strengthens tooth enamel. So it has these like weird little side effects, so to speak. But then there are all these little other constituents in cacao, as there are in coffee and tea and all these other plants, obviously, because their plants are soups of chemicals, really. They have a fingerprint that's all their own. And I call some of the little trace elements in cacao, trace chemicals, I call them cacao's fairy dust, because I think they all, and I've presented what evidence is available in the book, I think they all synergize with each other. And so a lot is made about cacao containing phenethylamine, which is the chemical that your brain releases when you're in love or whatever. The amount in cacao is tiny. It's really minuscule. But cacao also contains low levels of other compounds called linaloyl ethanolamine and N-O-linaloyl ethanolamine. Couldn't say that when you're drunk. And that when they're combined with phenethylamine, they actually prevent it being broken down. And the trigonelline in cacao, which is weirdly also found in fenugreek, it helps ferry phenethylamine into the brain. So you've got this tiny low amount of phenethylamine with a couple of other compounds that stop it being broken down, with another compound that takes it directly into the brain. And then you have the polyphenols in cacao, the antioxidants, which of course most of the research is now focused on, because they have all these benefits like reducing inflammation in the linings of blood vessels and being vasodilatory and protecting against type 2 diabetes. They sort of like have an insulin facilitating effect and all this groovy stuff that protects against metabolic disease, basically. But one of the effects of the polyphenols in this regard is that they also are what's known as monoamine oxidase inhibitors, meaning pharmacologically they stop the breakdown of monoamines, which are substances including serotonin, dopamine, phenethylamine. So they're not super strong. They're not like strong enough to, like, a bar of chocolate isn't contraindicated with most antidepressants, for example, but there is that effect. So altogether, this little, and you've got the pharmacology bit is fascinating, and I'm sure I'll be geeking out too much for some of your viewers, but like, to me it's really interesting because you've got this is classic for me of herbal pharmacology, and this is what I mean about trying to make the book a bit of a Trojan horse for some ideas in natural medicine by using cacao as an exemplar of that. You find that these constituents act together in concert to create a sort of chorus of effects that add up to a distinctive, which is super obvious to anyone who's into plant medicine. It's like, of course they do, but it's it's good sometimes to really dig in and go, okay, the strength of modern pharmacology is it's good at filleting stuff and getting out that, okay, this is the bit and that's how it does that, and this is the bit and that's how it does that. But it can all become a bit like that. I don't know if you know that game of Operation, where you take, put the thigh bone in, it goes, and then, it's like taking little bits out. But what you can use that for as a herbalist is to look at all these different mechanisms, and just look how that interacts with that, and that interacts with that, and that interacts with that. So it's kind of, So with cacao, you've got all these little constituents. So you've got the phenethylamine, which is potentiated. You have these little trace compounds like anandamide, which is the body's natural cannabinoid, which is present in chocolate. So it's thought to have a relaxing effect. Again, tiny trace amounts. But that is also somewhat buffered. I think I may have misspoken earlier that the linaloylethanolamine and those two that I can't now pronounce because I've done it once, those two actually buffer the anandamide, and the phenethylamine is buffered by the monoamine oxidase inhibitors and ferried into the brain by trigonelline. See, this is why I actually had to write this down in a book, because all this stuff is like super complicated. So I have actually got a flow chart somewhere in the book where it's got all the arrows. So if you really want to follow every rabbit down every hole, you can do. But the point is, you have this little suite of compounds in these fermented seeds from this magical tree that add up, to my mind, to produce what I tried to argue were two particular effects. And the first I call hedonic modulation, which is sort of playing around with the brain's pleasure circuitry, so that it makes people more responsive to pleasurable feelings and thoughts, but not in a way that's not in a super obvious way. Like, it's not like, woohoo, I'm flying, or, like, it's not like just a blunt antidepressant. It's just like a subtle amplification of pleasure response, which I think is super cool. And the other one, and I'm on slightly shakier ground here because I was only able to find one piece of main pharmacological evidence from an animal experiment, sadly, and some other sociological stuff suggesting that it might be an antiphobic agent, a plant that reduces conditioned fear. And I had pretty much that reaction, Rosalee, when I first read that. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, because it also put me in mind of the bit in Harry Potter where, when Harry gets attacked by Dementors and then Professor Lupin gives him some chocolate afterwards. And I just thought, that's like literally in culture, right? Yeah. And they have this one crazy rat experiment where they feed rats a moderate dosage of cacao. I think it's equivalent to 10 grams in humans. In the book, I wrote it was equivalent to 40 grams or something, but I actually got the calculation wrong. I've since recalculated and found it's even less than I thought, but that only actually strengthens my argument. So I thought, okay, that's good. But what they found in this experiment is it reduced the conditioned fear in rats. So there's generalized anxiety, which is like, you can't, you just don't want to do anything, don't want to leave the house, whatever. Conditioned fear is more like, in humans, the most extreme version of that is something like PTSD, where it's like a learned fear that, which, everybody gets to some degree, but the extreme version is PTSD, like where somebody's been through a horrible situation and they can get literally re-triggered into anxiety by something that is reminiscent of that or brings it up for them. And what they found is giving these rats little bits of cacao reduce their conditioned fear responses. And I think it was a really simple experiment. Like, they put them in a little really simple maze where there's a covered bit and an open bit that's out exposed. And so what they do is they poke them out of the covered bit, and then obviously the rats will like crouch because they're like, what's going on? And it's how quickly they unfreeze and start to explore, or do they just run back into the covered bit? And they found that if they're given cacao, they will tend to crouch for less time and start to explore a bit more. And interestingly, this wasn't true of caffeine. It wasn't true of many stimulants, but it happened with cacao. And then there's some interesting social sort of data that I give many more examples for, but like there's one of my favorites is a study of new mums from Italy, where they got like 300 new mothers, and they sort of interviewed them about their babies and about their experience during pregnancy. And they correlated the level of stress the mums experienced during their pregnancy with how the mums rated their children's temperaments at 1 year old. So it was really, really interesting. And they found that the new mums who had experienced more stress during their pregnancy tend to rate their children's temperaments at 1 year old more negatively. But they also found that the women in this study who had, and this study was not sponsored by a chocolate company, I hasten to add, it was like done by the University of Helsinki or something, but it was so that's important, because like if it was sponsored by Mars, it'd be like questionable. But they actually looked at the chocolate consumption of the women during pregnancy, and they found that those women who'd consumed more chocolate rated their children's temperaments more positively at 1 year old. And that effect was even more, that differential was even more noticeable in the mums who had said they were stressed during the pregnancy. And of course that's correlation, it's not causation. So, you know, if we're putting our little science hats on, we could say, okay, well, that could be because the kind of people who like chocolate are the kind of people who would be like that anyway. You know what I mean? They'd be kind of people who were a bit more upbeat, possibly. Or did the chocolate affect do something to the hormones or whatever that changed the personality of the kids? Or were the women who rated their kids more positively because they were all high on chocolate all the time? You know, there are lots of different possibilities. But what makes that super intriguing to me is there's been a couple of experiments in humans showing that cacao, in the form of just dark chocolate, which is obviously adulterated with sugar and adulterated with fat, actually reduces the level of adrenaline and cortisol in humans. It does that acutely, like within 24 hours of consuming some, but also over a 2-week period. And they measured that in saliva and in urine, and the effect was strongest in people who were more stressed. So the more anxious people were, the greater it reduced cortisol and adrenaline. So anyway, I sort of like tried to sort of pull together all these little threads out of my own obsession with this substance. And as a herbalist, my intention was to try and pull all this information together, find out what made it work, but then also reconstruct some of the ancient recipes and formulas for cacao, because and I admit this is a belief. As a herbalist, I usually tend to assume that the older or more roots level formulas or way of doing things are probably best, because they're time tested. There's often the reason for how things have been done. So obviously cacao was part of the indigenous Mesoamerican cultures, and they usually drank it. You know, they sort of roasted the beans, mixed them with other plants, and made it into a drink. And so those forms are obviously much less adulterated and messed about with the sort of sugary added fat sort of chocolate. Not that I'm in any way decrying chocolate. Chocolate is a fantastic, wonderful invention. So, you know, nothing against chocolate, but the traditional drinks are going to be a bit pokier. And so what's interesting to me about a lot of this research as well is that if the highly processed chocolate can do this, how much more powerful are the original forms? And I think, having experimented with those original forms, I can say they're a fair bit more powerful. So yeah, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to get to those recipes in a moment. But first, as you're talking about all these things, I'm just thinking about like, the modern studies and how they're looking at this and how cacao might be affecting our brain chemistry. And I was thinking, gosh, it'd be really cool to see studies formed not just around like taking cacao, like you said, with the Italian mothers taking chocolate, but more intentional things and like working with set and setting like they do with other things. But then I'm thinking like, oh, well, that's why we have cacao ceremonies, right? Like that's already a part of the culture.
So many cool tangents from what you just said, right? But you mentioned the word intention, and that's really huge. There's a couple of psychological experiments that are super basic that I mention. I can't remember which chapter, but I talk about that, where they I think they're more like just testing different foods, but they tested dark chocolate against apples and water and dry crackers, and found that out of those foods, only chocolate raised mood. But the most important thing was that chocolate only raised mood when people focused on it, like they put their intention on it when they were consuming it. And there's a really out there experiment by Dr. Dean Radin, who wrote the book Real Magic, which I would highly recommend to your more esoterically inclined viewers, because he does all these interesting scientific experiments and stuff that would be considered parapsychological or whatever. But he did set up a little double-blind, placebo-controlled study where he got some chocolate to be blessed by either meditators or Buddhist monks or priests or just different people to bless the chocolate, and then gave it to people to eat. So people were given either blessed chocolate or unblessed chocolate, and then there's the control group who were sad because they got no chocolate, and then just like gave them that to eat. And he was able to show that the people who received the blessed chocolate received a much stronger, measurably stronger by self-reported, but it was double-blind, placebo-controlled. They got a measurably stronger increase in their self-reported well-being. So that's interesting, because there's some psychological experiments showing that when you're eating chocolate, having the intention to feel good makes it stronger. And then there's this slightly more woo, esoteric, spooky and exciting experiment, which I'm all for, where they sort of put the meditation into it, and so people who got the blessed chocolate had a stronger effect. So that intention can be sort of inside or outside, which is, and I'm mentioning this because you talked about the cacao ceremonies, so that really plays into that. And my feeling is cacao, because it's, as I say, my little hypotheses, my little toys on this one are it's a hedonic modulator, so I think it amplifies those pleasure responses, and it's an antiphobic agent. So it's kind of like a psychic lubricant. I think it loosens all the the bits of you that want to sort of hold on. It loosens them a bit up here, because it makes you a bit more receptive to positive intention and a bit less controlled by fear. So I think this is why these ceremonies have really taken off. But I do have to say, and this is not me, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade here, because I think the cacao ceremonies are brilliant. I think it's a really interesting movement. They are a modern reinvention. They're not like I've seen a few cacao ceremony people saying these are the ancient Maya ceremonies. It's like, no, they're not. They're a 21st century reimagining. I don't think that any traditional Maya cultures drank cacao in exactly that way. Was cacao really, really important in Mesoamerica? Yes. Is it massively culturally important even today for many Maya peoples and indigenous peoples in Central America? Absolutely yes. Is it used in the same way that we do with cacao ceremonies now? No. It's used more as a sacrament. It's involved in lots of important social functions, but not in exactly the same way that it's used now. But it is massive in pre-Columbian myths. Like cacao seems to be associated with the underworld, with riches. There's some really interesting codices showing cacao trees with ancestors emerging from their base and speaking. There's a few indigenous myths which link cacao explicitly to the underworld and to ancestors. There's a whole set of tangents I could go on down there. So it is massively important. So I'm not saying it's not important or not relevant in ceremony. I'm saying the cacao ceremonies are a great thing. I'm also saying they're definitely a modern reinvention of something. So that's a really, really good thing and brilliant. We just got to be a little bit careful about the whole cultural appropriation thing. Do you know what I mean? So
I can
just from that point of view. Yeah.
So you've talked about cacao is health benefits in some ways that I did not see coming, so that's interesting. I'm curious about other, like, we're gonna be like, what are health benefits of cacao? Like, what else would you share?
Okay, super cool. There's lots. There's so many. So I'll start with contraindications, because there aren't many of those. And so let's get the neggies out the way first. So that the negatives there are Just I'd be careful of cacao if you have acid reflux or GORD, because it's a nut, basically. It's a seed, and it's got quite high fat content. Now, most of the fats in it are good. They're not going to raise your cholesterol, but because it's fatty and contains a bit of caffeine, it can exacerbate reflux a bit. So if you get lots of reflux, then you might just have to moderate it a bit. And the other things are a bit more rare. So if you have Wilson's disease, which is super rare, which is really high copper levels, be careful, because cacao has naturally very high levels of copper. It's one of the highest copper foods in existence. But I mean, there are a couple more minor contraindications. Those are the only negatives. What it's really good for, all the modern research is sort of focusing on the polyphenols and how good they are for circulation and the circulatory system. So in terms of if we're thinking herbally, anything to do with compromised circulation, or so with it can help a little bit with high blood pressure, but it really just reduces like blood pressure like by 1 point or half a point. But in terms of risk factors for stroke and heart attack, blood pressure is obviously one, but there are lots of others. One of the major risk factors being inflammation in the linings of blood vessels, and cacao really seems to help with that. So it really reduces inflammation in the linings of blood vessels. It dilates blood vessels. It improves blood flow everywhere. So they've literally put people into CAT scanners after they've had chocolate and found that it improves the blood flow to the brain, to the skin, everywhere. So another interesting side thought I'm going to throw out there for herbalists is, I think cacao is an effective potential drug delivery system. So if you've got some herbs that taste nice, so maybe not your elecampane or wormwood or something, but just stuff that tastes reasonably nice, you could put that in as powders, or use a hot infusion to make a really good hot chocolate, preferably with some grated, good quality block cacao. And the cacao, because it gets the blood flowing everywhere, including right into the brain, it'll help get those herbs there. But cacao on its own will improve blood supply to the brain and everywhere in the skin. So it's really good for circulatory issues. It's really good for reducing the risk of heart attack and stroke. It's really good for improving insulin sensitivity. So if somebody's tending towards type 2 diabetes, just adding a little handful of cacao nibs to their diet every day will help. Will it on its own resolve the issue? No, obviously you've got to exercise and diet and all the other bits and stuff, sorry, but it's a pleasant thing. This is what I love about cacao. It's one of those things that you're very rarely going to get someone who's reluctant to take it, unless they're actively allergic. Or another contraindication, although this is one that's it's been disproven, but cacao for some people is said to be a migraine trigger. Now I say said to be because when they've tested it, they found that very, very often it isn't. This is one of these things. It's a food that's high in tyramine, which is an amino acid that can be a migraine trigger. But when it was actually tested, they found that it often isn't. So people think it is, but practically speaking, if somebody thinks a food is a trigger, there's such a thing as a conditioned response, which means it probably will act like a trigger. So if people have something in their heads, or if we've had a reaction to something before, it's so just that's a. But in actual fact, cacao is not traditionally not a migraine trigger, at least scientifically speaking, it's not. So yeah, but so. What other things I've used it for? I mean, I've actually got a little list. I'll probably go to my mini book for this one because I've got a little list of conditions. So
I was curious about you talking about using it. It's almost like as if it's a catalyst, like we might use like cayenne or ginger in a formula, but it's a non-warming. I mean, it's like got a totally different energetic to it, but kind of in this different way.
Yeah, that's super interesting, Rosalee. Yeah, so cayenne and ginger obviously being quite heating and dispersive and get things everywhere. Cacao traditionally was said to be slightly cooling, which is interesting because it's got that circulatory thing. It gets the blood flowing everywhere. But the cooling thing, I think, perhaps fits more with the lowering cortisol and adrenaline thing. So it's an interesting paradoxical plant because it's definitely a stimulant because the theobromine and caffeine, but it also acts as a vasodilator and a lower of physical stress, a reducer of the physical stress response. So I've found I've used it really when I want to give people cacao, and I also want to give them other plants that are compatible with it. So I've had, in terms of the circulatory thing, I've had a couple of elderly gentleman clients who were having plumbing problems, let's say. So in terms of their ability to interact with their partners in the bedroom, let's say. And so giving them cacao like a strong drink of cacao in the morning with other herbs that were circulatory and sort of also relaxant. So I think a hot infusion of something like tilia with verbena and ternera, some sort of aphrodisiac, relaxing, vasodilatory, anti-atherosclerotic, sort of but use that to make a good hot chocolate. It tastes really nice. They're really into it. And after a few weeks, it really improves the circulation. So that's one use.
Make you a very popular herbalist too.
Potentially. I mean, yeah, I think it's not a bad thing to suggest. I mean, I tend to suggest cacao to all sorts of clients now. So if you want an agent, a plant that improves circulation, reduces physical stress response, and has a bit of a positive effect on cognition and thinking, then a little bit of cacao, and also improves the microbiome. There's some research showing that but interestingly, there's what's called a J-shaped curve here, where if you give people a tiny little bit of cacao, it improves the microbiome a little bit, but then there's a sweet spot in the middle, like that. Where if you think about the J, like there's the tall bit. Actually, this is a sort of mirror image of a J, but there's the tall bit on one side. So give somebody no cacao and their microbiome's not that great. Give somebody a little bit of cacao, like say 20 grams 3 times a week, like a little handful of cacao nibs 3 times a week. On average, that's going to help the microbiome the most, because it seems like the polyphenols inhibit the growth of lots of naughty stuff in the gut and really encourage the growth of things like lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, or the good bacteria. And there's a sweet spot in sort of like the middle, around 20 grams 3 times a week for an adult. And then if they have like loads of cacao, if they're leaning more on the chocoholic end of the spectrum, perhaps like myself, then the microbiome isn't quite as good. It's not quite as benefited. Like you can, as with most things, have too much of a good thing. It's not it
better than nothing, right? Let's just
totally. Yeah, that's what I mean about it being totally. Let's be clear. It's like that's what I mean about the J-shaped curve thing, right? Where it's sort of like if nothing is like the worst, and then in the middle you've kind of got a really sweet spot in terms of the microbiome. Oh, so sorry about that. So yeah, there's a benefit to the microbiome which is most noticeable with a little bit regularly. So yes, I've recommended it to clients mainly for those things. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, that in and of itself would probably be enough. But it's also like the high doses are also quite useful for certain kinds of pain. So they've done clinical trials with trigeminal neuralgia, which is that neuralgic pain of the trigeminal nerve. Sometimes people get it after they've had dental surgery that's gone a bit awry, or I think it can arise after people have had ocular herpes or whatever. You can get just the pain in the trigeminal nerve, which is really painful. That's sort of facial nerve pain. Well, cacao reduces that pain. And one of the traditional admixtures of cacao that you've already mentioned was cayenne, and that also can help a little bit with that. So you could have cacao with a little bit of cayenne in it, a little bit of spicy chocolate drink, and that would help reduce that pain. And that's just symptomatic, but yeah, okay. I mean, I think that's enough to be going on with.
Yes, that's
now.
Lovely. So what you're saying is we should eat a bar of Tony's Chocoholic a day. Is that what I heard?
Well, no, my preferred, like there's actually a little hierarchy of quality here. Like as you might imagine, I think the best quality is closest to its natural herbal form, to its OG form. And I mean, I could go in a whole rabbit hole about what's the best, like the raw cacao, and to my mind, I'm just going to put it out there. I think the best format is slightly fermented cacao seeds that have been lightly toasted. And toasting does reduce the polyphenol content a bit, but also the toasting produces these other fairy dust compounds. It produces a few more of these really aromatic essential oils. It produces a couple of components, those essential oils called pyrazines, some of which are really interesting. These other little sets of compounds called the diketopiperazines, which we don't even know what they do, but we know they get into the brain. And some of these DKPs that have been researched have anti-cancer activity. Some of them have activity helping protect nerve cells. So anyway, so lightly toasted, slightly fermented seems to be optimal, because there is a movement towards raw cacao, which I don't want to diss, but I think the other reason I think from a traditional point of view that lightly toasted, slightly fermented might be optimal is because cacao traditionally was said to be cooling. So the slight toasting of it would kind of offset it more towards neutral from a modern point of view.
No, you have me at fairy dust. I'm in.
Yeah, I mean I love that name. That's like yeah, but yeah. So the question was, should we eat a bar of Tony's a day? Well, eating dark chocolate is also fine. Like most of the studies have been based on that, but obviously there's quite a lot of added sugar in it. From the studies, dark chocolate, even with its added sugar, so if you think about it, 85% dark chocolate means it's 85% cocoa solids, of which perhaps 20 or 30% will be added fat. So cacao beans are ground into a cocoa mass, which is just the cacao bean, but cacao beans are 50% fat already. So then to make most bars of chocolate, they'll add extra cocoa fat because that makes them sort of snappier and gives them the texture. It sort of melts in your mouth or your hand or your pocket or wherever, it just gives it that extra texture that we like. And then the remainder is always sugar. So an 85% cocoa solids dark chocolate bar means it's going to have about 60% just cocoa beans, which are 50% sugar, 50% fat anyway, an additional 20 or 30 grams fat or something, and then the remainder of sugar, that last 15% is sugar. So it's not optimal. Is it bad? No, all the studies show it's good. Dark chocolate is still good for you, but if you're going to optimize it, I'd suggest either getting some couverture, which is just blocks of straight up cacao, like that you could buy for ceremony, but you can also buy couverture from chocolatiers and stuff like that. And in the States, I think they sell blocks of couverture in Whole Foods, probably for a ridiculous markup, but you can get it. And then you just you grate it and add hot water and sweetener of choice and just make a drink. Or you could get cocoa nibs, just the broken roasted beans, and stick them in a granola or a trail mix, or have them with dates or raisins or whatever. Like my breakfast this morning, it feels so decadent. It's brilliant. It's just like oats, cocoa nibs, and then just sultanas and dates and some frozen fruit and some nuts, and then with loads of coconut yogurt on it or something like that. Soya coconut yogurt. Yeah, and that's like it's got all the nutrition in there. It's incredibly sweet, but it's got all the sugars with plenty of fiber and polyphenols and all that good stuff. So yeah, you can crowbar
Marcos,
it into
I'm wondering if you can clear something up for me once and for all. I was telling you before we hit record that my bestie and I were like twinsy opposites, and so she and I both love chocolate. She thinks dark chocolate is disgusting, and I feel the same way about milk chocolate. This is something that we, will not agree on. It could possibly cause fights depending on what chocolate we have available.
Right.
Can you just once and for all side with me and make sure that she knows she's wrong? And so
I'm okay.
You are like the cacao expert, and so.
For the sake of not breaking up a long-standing friendship, Rosalee, I'm not going to. I used to back in the day before I got into maybe when I was a kid, I used to love white chocolate. Now that I'm older, I love dark chocolate, and of course, I love the actual cacao. So of course,
sophisticated that we grow into as adults is like
yes,
dark chocolate.
Yes, but potentially. And of course, I have a huge personal bias in this regard because I love my cacao. So I go with the dark every time. The white chocolate.
So you're saying is you as the chocolate expert going towards dark chocolate. saying.
You're determined to get my professional stamp of approval on like just like get some artillery on your side in this one. I would certainly personally agree that dark chocolate is my favorite and is much better for you. White chocolate, in my view, isn't actually really chocolate at all. It's a confection, and a very sophisticated confection, but it's made with the only cacao adjacent thing about it. It does contain something of cacao, and that's the fat. It's got the actual cocoa butter, which is a really interesting sort of fat, because there's a lot of stearic acid in it, which is a saturated fat that doesn't raise naughty cholesterol and is great for the skin. So has all that stuff. So it's got lots of cocoa butter, milk powder, and then sugar, but it doesn't have any of those groovy polyphenols and the fairy dust compounds and all of that stuff that I've just been whiffling on about, that has all the medicinal benefits. So the white chocolate has negative medicinal benefits. It will act more like a confection in terms of it'll probably, as most sweets do, increase the risk of diabetes or weight gain or all of these things that are overconsumed. Dark chocolate, on the other hand, I mentioned weight gain because there's some studies showing that people who eat more dark chocolate actually have less weight gain than people who don't eat it. It's a bit like nuts, similar studies for nuts, and they have this very surprising and paradoxical relationship, considering that they're quite calorie dense foods, with weight gain, which again shows you I think it's more about the nature of a thing than its specific constituents. It's fun to itemize them and look at the mechanisms and all of that, but at the end of the day, a whole food or a whole plant is its own thing. So yeah.
So you've done a very diplomatic answer, because you made
I totally have.
You made white chocolate bad. Which was not really the question. It was more about milk chocolate. Milk chocolate is because milk chocolate. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke there, Rosalee, didn't I? Because your friend likes milk chocolate, not white chocolate. Who likes white chocolate?
Kids mainly, but and some adults. I know some adults do. But yeah, the milk chocolate is that does have some of the polyphenols in, but again, that in terms of the medicinal benefit, then the more polyphenols and the more of the dark stuff, the better. So the dark chocolate is, however, I'll add one point of nuance in favor of your friend here. There was a small human study showing that milk chocolate.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Go on.
Milk chocolate seemed to have a good effect, on a better effect on people's anxiety. I think it's from a book by a technical book I've got behind me by Paoletti and colleagues, a technical book on chocolate. And there's a small human study where they gave people either dark chocolate or milk chocolate over a number of weeks and measured different variables and stuff. And obviously the dark chocolate had a better effect on blood antioxidant levels and vasodilation and all that stuff. But they actually found that the milk chocolate seemed to have, in some regards, a better effect on mood, I think. And that may be because of the milk. The casein in milk is an exorphin, right? It binds to opiate receptors, makes people feel relaxed. That's why people are really into milk and cheese, and find it quite difficult to quit if they try to go vegan and all that. So so milk chocolate does have that potentially sort of mildly tranquilizing effect for some that dark chocolate, despite the fact that it lowers cortisol and adrenaline more, doesn't necessarily have. But I would always advocate for the most potent original form, which to me is the drinks made out of the OG material, which is just the roasted toasted seeds that are ground and then mixed with water, like ground to a liquid and then mixed with hot water.
Yeah, let's get into that. But first, I just want to clarify, you did side with me. I would say that Rebecca would say that the milk chocolate feeds her soul, I think. So
okay, I get that. I mean, like, look, a little of what you fancy is always the thing. So as long as what you fancy isn't actively bad for you, and milk chocolate in some trials does have some of those pharmacological benefits, they're just going to be a lot more attenuated because there's a much lower level of the polyphenols and all those little magic fairy dust things.
So you have 2 bars of milk chocolate is what you're saying. Just kidding.
No.
All right, so you have shared an amazing recipe with us, Pozol, and I would love to hear about this recipe. You've already been talking about like drinking the chocolate and these more OG preparations. So I want to hear all about it. And I think I looked at the recipe. It looks fascinating. And when I looked at it, I thought, Marcos needs to tell us why we have to go to all this trouble.
Well, actually, it's not that. I mean, I've given you the recipe longhand, but it's seriously not that difficult, because actually you can make it a lot easier just by buying some masa harina flour, you know, that's used for making tortillas. But if you do buy that, try and don't get one of the bleached forms. Like there's lots of like standard masa harina flour from the supermarket. It's a bit like bleached white flour. It's literally bleached. You want a masa harina flour that smells like corn. You know, it's got to be yellow, and it's got to, or blue, because there's blue corn as well. That, like, you know, it smells like corn. It smells like real tortillas. You know, not like the white flour tortillas, the real ones. Like so you can just get that flour ready made, and you can just get some couverture cacao, like a block of cacao that's solidified, that just ready for grating, and make it with that. So
when you say that, it's just like 100% cacao. That's what that means.
Yes, 100% cacao. Couverture is just like the posh chocolatier's name for when they've got the beans. The beans are roasted, shelled, ground into what's called cocoa liquor, which is it's like making a nut butter. You just grind them enough that the fats liquefy and it becomes liquid, and then that, when it cools down to room temperature again, it sets, and they set it into blocks. But they don't add any extra cocoa fat or any sugar as they do when they're making chocolate. You know, it's literally just blocks of solidified, like in a way, cocoa nut butter, you know, but not coconut. Cocoa nut anyway. So the blocks of couverture is the posh name that are used. Chocolatiers buy them in large blocks, but these are the essentially most couverture bought by chocolatiers is tempered, meaning that it's been, I think it's already tempered. So they've set it in such a way that the cocoa butter doesn't crystallize, so they have a uniform color and texture. I think if you buy ceremonial cacao blocks, because there's less control of the temperature when it's set, you'll often have a marbling effect or some, because you know the cocoa butter, when it solidifies, it will crystallize sometimes, which is why sometimes if you buy really old dark chocolate, it blooms. You get these white patches on it, and it tastes really gritty because that point was probably not worth making, but I wanted to mention it because if somebody gets a block of cacao and it's got a weird mottled appearance, it's totally fine. It just, because you're going to grate it into hot water, and then that's going to melt the fat anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, this recipe Pozol is a recipe that's still drunk in many parts of Central America today. So like in a lot of Mexico and Chiapas, loads of parts of Mexico, it's still drunk. But the recipe I got from a vendor in San Cristobal de las Casas, which is in the south of Mexico, and it's just a very simple recipe using the masa harina, which is corn flour, cacao, and water, and that's literally it. So even though the recipe is written out longhand, so if those of you who want to do it super traditional style and like hardcore, you can like literally grind the corn yourself, and you can toast and grind your cacao beans and prepare all that, or you can just, and I've put this in the recipe, I hope, if not, I'll have to send you an amendment, Rosalee, but you can just get masa harina flour and a block of couverture, and you can grate your couverture and get your masa harina flour and put, like, for every two parts of the masa harina flour, it's 1 part of grated cacao, and then you mix it in with hot water and stir it, and then you can serve it with ice, like as a cool room temperature drink. And it's really nice, and I had it in Mexico, and it's great on a hot day. So, but that was the form in which cacao is mostly consumed in liquid form in Central America. It's often with atoles, which are the standard sort of corn-based gruels that are just both food and drink in one thing. That's it's a very traditional form of taking nutrition in lots of parts of the world, and corn and cacao have always been in Central America paired with each other, and even like mythically, corn was because it's sort of like it grows up. It's sort of an annual plant, which is bright yellow. It loves the sunshine. And cacao, the pods hang down, they're covered, they're sort of pale white. It likes the shade. It's a perennial. So cacao had this association with the underworld and with the moon, and corn had an association with the sun. And there's a few traditional myths which I detail in the book, which are probably a little bit too long for me to go into now, also because I will definitely make a narrative mistake if I try and recount them. But there's a few traditional myths which sort of make that more explicit. But they were often paired with each other in the traditional mythology, and that's fits with the fact that they were used together and still are in these drinks. So you can get atoles, which are just corn and other things. Side note, pozol, not to be confused with pozole, which is a traditional Mexican soup. So yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I remember the first time I had pozol, I remember thinking, this is what I've always wanted hot chocolate to be like, because there's a thickness to it that it's just, it almost makes it like a semi-meal in some ways. And I know it's strength, like stamina and strength. I mean, it's very fortifying in that way.
Yes, totally. I mean, I interviewed a midwife in Guatemala, I think in Reshua, which is in the sort of Alta Verapaz. It's somewhere in the center of Guatemala. Senora Carl, she was really, really sweet lady. She'd been a midwife for most of her life. A very traditional small village. And she told me that they recommend atole, cacao atole, which I don't think they called it pozol in that region, but there's various different local names for it, to breastfeeding mothers, because both of those, because they said it's good for the mother when it's to prevent them losing weight, and particularly if there's like food scarcity, because both of those, corn and cacao, can both be stored as dried foods with a long shelf life, and they have obviously corn provides you with the carbohydrates, and if it's prepared like masa harina flour, it's nixtamalized, which means it's cooked with a little bit of lime, which liberates niacin from it, which otherwise it's got that B vitamin available, which other forms of corn don't. There's a huge long backstory of corn coming to Europe and loads of people getting pellagra and dying, which is niacin deficiency. Anyway, that's somewhere over there. So it's got the corn's your basic carbohydrate with a few little proteins. Cacao obviously contains the fats and all these fantastic polyphenols and little health supporting, disease preventing plant chemicals. So yeah, she was a very informative on that score. So yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for making it sound easy, and for listeners, you can download your recipe for Pozol. It did. No, you really did. You can download your recipe for Pozol at herbswithrosalieepodcast.com or check out the show notes. Well, Marcos, I've known you now for about an hour and 20 minutes, and I can 100% say that you know a bit about cacao.
Thanks.
And you've written not one but two books about cacao, and I think this would be a great time to talk about those.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I've got my big one, which hopefully I should be on its way to you, and that's The Secret Life of Chocolate, which is the big doorstop one that took me 14 years and 3 trips. Wow. 14 years to write. So only a mere 14 years. If I'd have known that when I started, I'd probably have given up.
But 3 trips to the Americas, is that what
you're yes. So I did sort of like over 2008, 2011, 2018. So I did like each time I did 6 weeks, and I sort of saved up and then just went out and interviewed as many like curanderos and growers and just people like herbalists in markets and stuff, and just anyone who I could interview who could give me any information about it. So I'm super proud of that. But that's the big one. That's the big telephone directory size thing. And then my little mini book is this little mini tiny paperback version here, which is the sort of Cliff Notes version, and it's called Pharmacology, and it's cacao in medicine and ceremony. And I made this on the recommendation of the publisher. They said, look, the big one's obviously the coffee table offering for anyone who's super into chocolate, or exactly. But this one is the more sort of like slightly more affordable mini Cliff Notes version for people who just want, the brief. So yeah.
Well, thank you for both of those. I'm excited to dive in. And something that we didn't talk about in our time together, at least on the recording, is that you also do medical astrology. and I'd love to hear
Yes.
about that and what your offerings are in that realm.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, this is my even more esoteric hat. So I got really interested in that when I was studying. I was always slightly interested in it when I was studying herbal medicine at Middlesex 20 years ago. There's a book by a fantastic herbalist called Graham Tobin called Cool Pepper's Medicine, which just talked about that. So I sort of filed that away and thought I really want to learn about medical astrology because it's part of our tradition for a few thousand years. So yeah, I studied that, and I now, so my recent project is I've started a little school called Plantarium, which is sort of medical astrology for herbalists, and there's going to be a little bit later of herbal medicine for astrologers as well, but it'll be more sort of an introduction to. I don't want to go too far on that path because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are so many fantastic herbal schools out there, and I really think if anybody wants to learn herbal medicine, they need to go and learn herbal medicine properly, like just get right into it. So but there's going to be a little intro track for astrology for herbal medicine for astrologers, but my main thing is astrology for herbalists or other therapists. So we've just got our first little module up last year. We've got a few more in the works, so it's still like very much a baby, like in its infancy, but yeah, that's my new thing.
Very
that I'm
exciting. Congratulations on getting that out. And
yeah,
I know you've got websites for your school, you got websites for yourself as a herbal consultant, and as well as for the book, so we'll put all of the links out there for folks to find.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for being here. It's been really great. But before you go, I do have one last question. And that question is, what do you wish you'd known when you first started working with herbs?
So I thought about this. I think I have a really prosaic answer to this one, like really basic in a way. It's nothing to do with the herbs themselves, because I still am as or more enthusiastic about the plants now as that will I love them. So there's nothing that I don't love about the plants. The thing that I wish I'd known is how to be a business person as a herbalist, like how to practice, how to do the self-employed business end of it, because like many other herbalists, I think I've struggled over the years with that thing of like how to operate within a capitalist system without because my instinct is like, I just want to, somebody's got something wrong with them, I just want to help them, but then you've got to eat and earn money and all of that. So and I personally can easily burn myself out, and just and I have done many times where I've sort of like just gone in, and so I think that's the tricky thing. But I mean, I've learned sort of now after 20 years, I'm sort of at a place where I'm starting to get that balance right. So, but that's what I wish I'd learned. But I do want to plug a friend's book here, if I may, Rosalee, because I think this is a really useful book. It's my friend Hannah Sharman, who's written a book called Minted, and this is only going to be relevant to herbalists and herbal practitioners, I think. But Hannah, like myself, is a UK-based herbalist. She graduated from Middlesex a couple of years before me, in I think 2003 or something, and like myself, she had a struggle for, or maybe even before that actually, but she struggled for many years to sort of make that balance between being a self-employed herbalist, like trying to make it work and having to do side hustles and not get in the business end. So she's written this book called Minted, which is about how to make money as a herbalist in a sustainable way, and she's kind of worked that out over years. And so for myself, I prefer now to see fewer clients. I charge more for my services for those clients because I want to be able to offer a good level of service, and then I see a handful, 10% of my clients I do for free, but I have like full editorial control over who those people are. So that's I know other herbalists who like see lots and lots of clients, and few herbalists who see just one or two, but everyone has to come to their working thing. But that's what I wish I'd known. And we had like at uni, we had a sort of a couple of modules at university on it that weren't super helpful, to be honest. It's like write a business plan or something, which was stupid. And then I spoke to a few herbalists, and herbalists are a fount of knowledge, but everyone has their different ways of practicing. And most herbalists, I think, are practical people. So they come to their own way of doing things. So yeah, there's a few things I wish I'd have known. So I wanted to point out Hannah's book because it's bloody brilliant, and there's a lot of useful stuff in there. So yeah.
Cool. Well, gosh, I love this response, Marcos. I think it's the first time we've ever had something like that as a response.
Well, it's a very personal thing, but yeah.
Well, I'm a huge proponent of herbalists learning how to make a living. And I think there's a couple of things. One, it's just inherently hard because you have to be an entrepreneur. And that's not in a lot of people would rather be in the garden than be, learning marketing or whatever. So I think there's that. Then there's also, I think for many of us do have that kind of like ick factor with money and capitalism. Yeah. And so then that kind of can understandably hold people back as well. But there's almost like this like shame of like, oh, it's almost like shameful to make money as an herbalist. And I hear, and once in a while I get a response, when I have like a course being offered that people say like, this should be for free, like you're, that kind of thing.
I get it, but it also makes me, yes. Yeah. I get it, but it makes me cross when I hear that. But I understand
like herbalists need to learn how to make a good living because we need more herbalists. And that's, if someone wants to be a bank teller, they can be a bank teller. But if somebody's true heart's desire is to be an herbalist, I don't want them to be a bank teller to put food on the table. I want them to be an herbalist, So I really appreciate that. And I do, in the past, I've offered a business for herbalist class kind of thing because like I'm very proponent of this. Like we need to make
that's amazing.
Money. We need to make it in a good way. We need to, live our heart's passion and find that balance, like you said.
Totally.
None of us get into this for the money, but we do need to put food on the table when it comes at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I always there's a couple of things. One was like it was actually a YouTube relationship coach who I was watching her videos a while back for reasons I won't get into, but she came up, Susan Winter her name was, and she came up with a really interesting analogy that I thought that's applicable to so many other areas. And she talked about listening to your inner accountant, and she was talking about this in terms of resentment. Like if you start feeling resentful, it means your inner accountant is saying something's out of whack. So as a herbalist, I listen to that and I think if I'm starting to feel resentful, it means I know that I'm burning myself out and working and going beyond, and I'm not earning a living. So there has to be a balance between that and the totally, I mean, it does make me cross when I hear people say you should be doing this for free. But on the other hand, I totally get where they're coming from because, that whole thing about healthcare being a human right and all that. So there is a way of squaring that circle, and every herbalist has to come to that in different ways. You have to be able to make a living. And so for me, that way is I charge well for my services. I charge appropriately for my services. And then 10% I do for free, and I produce a bit of online content and do some teaching. So that's a way of propagating the thing. And so for you, you've got your online teaching. You've done lots of stuff to disseminate lots of free herbal information out there constantly. And then you have your practice where, you know what I mean? So, but there's different ways of doing this. I know some herbalists who do full community herbalism where they are treating lots of people for free or low cost, but then they're often subsidized and they're working for charities. And so there's different paths, but I think it's just getting the information out there about those paths. And I had no idea about this. And you have to you have to struggle through to your own thing. So if you're doing a course on it, that's fantastic. I had no idea, Rosie. It's brilliant because that's what we need. Yeah.
This has been so much fun. I feel like I could just after this long conversation, I can still just pop down to the cafe with you and keep the conversation going. So thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. I'd love to have you back sometime. So
I'd love to.
Yeah, it's just been lots of fun, and I appreciate the deep dive into cacao and just all these different perspectives as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to head over to the show notes at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com to download your beautifully illustrated recipe card. There, you'll also be able to sign up for my newsletter, which is the best way to stay in touch with me. You can find more about Marcos at his website, nocturnalherbalist.com. If you'd like more herbal episodes to head your way, then one of the best ways to support this podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks, and I'm so glad that you're here as part of this herbal community.
Also, a big round of thanks to the people all over the world who make this podcast happen week to week. Emily Thomas Anderson is the project manager who oversees the entire podcast operation, from guest outreach to writing show notes and on and on. I often tell people, I just show up. Emily does most of the heavy lifting. Nicole Paul is the operator for the entire Herbs with Rosalee school and community. She keeps an eagle-eye view on everything to ensure it's running smoothly. Francesca is our fabulous video and audio editor. She not only makes listening more pleasant, she also adds beauty to the YouTube videos with plant images and video overlays. Tatiana Rusakova is the botanical illustrator who creates gorgeous plant and recipe illustrations for us. I love them, and I know you love them. Once the illustration is ready, Jenny creates the recipe cards as well as the thumbnail images for YouTube. Alex is our behind-the-scenes tech support and social media manager, and Karen and Emily are our student services coordinators and community support. If you've written in with a question, undoubtedly you got help from them. For those of you who like to read along, Jennifer is who creates the transcripts each week. Xavier, my handsome French husband, is the cameraman and website IT guy. It takes an herbal village to make it all happen, including you. Thank you so much for your support through your comments, reviews, and ratings. One of my favorite things about this podcast is hearing from you. I read every single comment that comes in, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. Okay, you've lasted to the very end of this show, which means you get a gold star and this herbal tidbit. Well, if you're a cacao lover or just someone who enjoys diving deep into the magic of plants, then you have to check out Marcos's book, The Secret Life of Chocolate. It is one of the most impressive books I've ever seen on the subject, hands down. It's beautifully researched, richly layered explorations of cacao's history, mythology, ritual use, and medicinal qualities. This is not a casual read. It's a book to savor, much like cacao itself. It's rich, complex, and deeply rewarding when you take the time to sink into it. One of the many fascinating things I learned from this book is that the traditional Mesoamerican method of vigorously stirring cacao to create foam isn't just for show. It may actually enhance cacao's medicinal effects. So once again, traditional preparation methods knew exactly what they were doing. Also, reading this book just left me in awe of how much depth a single plant can hold, and how, as herbalists, we're surrounded by an entire world of plants, each with their own stories and traditions and gifts. It's so humbling and inspiring, and just a beautiful reminder of how much there is to explore out there in the plant world. So whether you are a chocolate enthusiast, an herbalist, or plant lore nerd, or maybe all three of them, you'll find yourself constantly reaching for this book. I can't recommend it enough. And if you are craving something a little more concise, then Marcos has also written a beautiful shorter book called Pharmacology, and that's focused on cacao's medicinal and ceremonial uses. Thank you once again for joining me on this herbal adventure. I'll see you next time. Hi, it's Rosalee. If this podcast has brought you inspiration or grounded you in your love of herbs, I'd love to invite you to join the podcast circle. Your membership helps support the show, and it gives you access to live herbal classes, exclusive resources, and a warm community of fellow plant lovers. Learn more and join us at herbalpodcastcircle.com. Your support truly helps this podcast thrive. Thank you.